Hi there, my name's Nick Francis. I'm the Chief Technology and Marketing Officer for Brooklyn Vendor Assurance. I'm also an Executive Advisor to the VendorOps community. I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking to you about what the VendorOps community is and what it can do for you. Before we get actually into what is VendorOps, it's a good chance to set the scene in terms of what the market challenge was that was recognised before the group was created. So around 2018, 2019, a group of individuals looked at what was a blueprint for a successful vendor/supplier management function. And albeit a number of organisations touched upon it as part of the procurement lifecycle, there was nowhere that one person could go to get an answer to that. And thus what we see today is a really fragmented industry with a not really good definition of what a solid discipline looks like around vendor management. So the response of that was to establish the VendorOps community and to define VendorOps as a combination of procurement, risk management and business operations skill set, and coming together as a team that's focused on monitoring and assessing risk associated with vendors or suppliers. They're focused on optimising relationships to extract value, to oversee contractual execution, to reduce risk and protect corporate assets, and also all the while ensuring compliance with both internal and external regulations in some industries which are more widely in place than others, such as financial services. So that's the backdrop to VendorOps as a community and the reason it came together. So early on, when defining what the VendorOps community would focus on and provide it with a scope, the concept of the VendorVerse was born. There's four elements to what makes up the VendorVerse across two different sides. One, an internal, inside of the business or inside of the large company and the enterprise, and the other is external. So on the internal side, it's all the vendors, both contracted, past and present, mixed with all the activity that goes around those contractual relationships and services that are being provided. Things such as the contract schedules, the documents themselves, the meetings, the actions, the risks that are coming out of that, anything that's connecting the services and the prescribed contractual vehicles with the activity that's going on internally. And then on an external basis, it's looking at all the activity that relates to a supplier or vendor, such as news, what's going on around the research companies, credit rating services, think Dun & Bradstreet and Experian, then mixed with regulatory or legislative controls that you'd find in government or some of the financial services industries, such as the European Banking Authority in Europe or the PRA and FCA in the UK. All that mixed together is a huge amount of data that we refer to as the VendorVerse, and that essentially is what an experienced vendor management function needs to be able to navigate. So VendorOps, what is it? So there's three elements that makes the VendorOps community, or at least the VendorOps framework and discipline. The first is the VendorVerse itself, so all the data related to the vendors, the suppliers that are past and present, all the activity that surrounds them, such as the risks, the meetings, the contractual schedules, mixed with all the external data that's relating to a vendor, such as credit checks, research, and then mixing that with legislation and regulation around how you should manage vendors effectively, or what you should do to manage vendors, which differs from industry to industry. When you then combine that with the policies set forward by a company to adhere to that or effectively manage vendors, and then from a policy you break down into processes to ensure that what's being asked at a policy level is being delivered at a process level, and then the outcomes are being recognised for whatever it is concerning. So that sets the scope and the activity, and the second part to it is ensuring that the right team is on hand to support that activity. So, and that activity is often in large organisations a matrix managed function across many teams and multiple departments that is made up with procurement type individuals, business operations specialists, and people specialised in risk and risk management, more commonly than not, to form a group that effectively de-risks and ensures supplier and vendor management is kept to a premium. All the while, the third point being that not only have you got all this huge amount of data, policies and processes to orchestrate and manage, you've then got multiple team members that need to be very much informed and working together in a cohesive, collaborative unit. You're going to need a platform or some kind of collaboration space to help manage all of the stuff that went before it. So those are the three key elements we talk about from a VendorOps community perspective that need to be at least acknowledged and in place before any type of meaningful supply management or vendor management can take place. So part of the VendorOps community, it was key for us to establish a life cycle, which is a repeatable process and principle that can be built upon based on feedback. So what you can see on your screens now is basically a 6-stage life cycle that goes from first defining a strategy, so looking at how a VMO can be created, focused on value and integrated with the business, looking at the business strategies and the directions from the shareholders, into looking at what underpins that value, that strategic direction in terms of the shape of the policies and the processes that the vendor or supplier management function will operate from, and making sure that they're aligned to that strategic internal intent but also any external need as well, such as regulation. Then making sure that that document or that policies or those processes that are so often written up in long format that are sent out over email or distributed, that as quick as they're sent out, they're forgotten and not acted upon because they're so hard to consume, is then broken down in sort of a digital medium to make sure they're next to the relevant person at the time of deploying that process or interacting with that policy. And from that point, and once it's being digitally distributed, it's then at the right time it's operated by a set of defined roles in the right hierarchy, matched with the right talent management plan to ensure that the people are skilled enough to deploy and recognise and operate that process effectively. And from that, get into a feedback loop where monitoring, reporting on the process and the policy, either at an individual process level or an entire policy level or a subset of that, provide qualitative and quantitative feedback based on the focus of the particular report. And from that goes into point 6 I've already mentioned, which is that built-in feedback loop to say kind of what's working, what isn't, what needs to be refined, what needs to be considered, and then back round to stage 1, which rather than defining becomes more of a refinement on a year-on-year basis. What does the company need to do? What's regulation telling us? What are our suppliers, services and vendors that are providing services to us need to be managed against more effectively? That feedback loop then closes the life cycle. The left-hand side in this case is much more akin with subject matter aligned architectural types that are experienced in writing policy, those that work in risk and procurement, and on the right is where the more experienced operational staff sit, those that have a situational awareness, that are operating the business and running the business on a day-to-day basis and interacting with the vendors directly. That as a collective that touches many people is what we see as the VendorOps Lifecycle. That is an overview of the VendorOps community and hopefully what you can see it can offer you. Please like, subscribe, become a member. It's all free. There's going to be tons of value put into the channels. Looking forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest VendorOps news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn. Links in the description below.